Hello, my name is Lina Teichmann, and I will be talking about the temporal dynamics underlying behaviorally relevant object properties during visual processing. If I would show you these four images and ask you what you see, you would be able to very quickly and accurately say that here you see a spider, there you see threads, and here you see an envelope, and there you see a rocket. However, these are just four out of many, many object categories that you can recognize. For our study, we chose images from 1,854 object categories. And each of these objects came from the things database. And for every object category, we had 12 different exemplars. We were interested in examining the neuroprocessing underlying object vision. And for that, we tested 4 participants in an MEG scanner, and each participant would return for 12 sessions and see a total of 22,248 images. While in the scanner, we recorded brain activation from each participant from 272 senses over time. Each of these horizontal bars here shows a trial. So, for example, in this first trial, the participant might have seen a bench, in the second one a bus, and then in other images for each of these trials. The most obvious thing we can ask here is when are different concept level representations evoked in the brain? To do this, what we can do is run time-resolved classification analyses, where we extract activation of sensor pattern activations at every time point. Then we can train a linear classifier that best distinguishes between the classes. And in this case here, it might be that the light blue dots are representing trials where the participants saw images of threads, whereas the blue ones, they saw images of a rocket. We can then take independent data and test how well the classifier can predict from the brain data alone what image the participant is looking at. And then what we end up with is our decoding accuracies over time. So, for example, here at the beginning, we see that there's that decoding accuracy is at chance. So we did all the pairwise classifications between all of the 1,854 object categories. So chance level is at 50%. And then there is information about the object category in the signal from around 100 milliseconds onwards. We can also see that if we run something like multidimensional scaling, that the time point of separation for higher level categories differs. So for example, here, if we contrast animals versus food, we can see that there's like a clear distinction at around 300 milliseconds, whereas for vehicles and tools, we might see a distinction earlier. However, from this, it is unclear what the visual or semantic properties are that drive this category decoding. And in particular, when I am asking you to look at these images, you can actually do a lot more than just saying what you see in each image. You could say that the rocket and the spider relate to each other because they can both move. You might also be able to tell that the envelope and the rocket are similar because they are both white, or that the thread and the spider are similar because both of these can be used for weaving. This rich and multi-dimensional representation is what we actually want to get at. So in a paper by Martin and Chris and their collaborators, they used a behavioral odd one out task and showed people similar object combinations as I've just showed you, and asked them which one of these 3 images is the odd one out. So in this case here, a lot of people would probably choose the rocket because the other 2 images show something that's really colorful. If I replace this image here in the middle with a seagull, people would probably pick the paint as the odd one out because both of these images show something that can fly. Getting trials like this and these similarity judgments across many, many people and across many trials, they ran a computational model on these behavioral responses and then found that there's 49 distinct dimensions that can kind of capture this multi-dimensional representation. The weight on each of the dimension for each of the images indicates how strongly this image is associated with a given dimension. So this, for example, is a distribution of one dimension. So here we have number of images on the x-axis, and we have the dimension weight on the y-axis. A high weight here means that these images are strongly associated with this dimension. And if we show these top images to an independent group of participants and we ask them what they think this dimension represents, they are saying that this dimension reflects colorfulness, colors, or color variety. Here is a different dimension that is related to air travel or flying. We can also look at this in a different way. So we can look at all 49 different dimensions and just look at how strong of a weight is associated with each object category. So here each bar represents each of the 49 dimensions, and the length indicates how strong the weight is for this object class. And what we can see here for thread, for example, the strongest, it scores strongest on colorful, cylindrical, and handicraft related. Similar for the spider here, we have all of the different dimension weights, and we can see that insects, repetitiveness, and animal related are the highest scoring dimensions for this object class. If we want to get at the neural representation of these dimensions, what we can do is we can again extract the activation across the senses, and each of these dots is just one single trial at a given time point. So in this trial here, they might have seen a wolf, and in this one here, they saw these colored balls. Then from the behavioral weights, we know that how strongly each image is associated with a given dimension. So for example, here, if we're focusing on the dimension colorful, we can say that these ones here have a really, really strong weight, whereas the images at the bottom have a weak weight. We can then color in these brain representations according to these colors. So for example, the things that score highly here might cluster actually together. And to examine this, we then ran a time-resolved linear regression for each of the dimensions. So to do this, we fit a plane describing the linear relationship between the neuroactivation pattern that we have here and the dimension label, which in this case are the colors. We then take independent data that we left out from training, and we predict the dimension label, so the weight, for each of the brain activation patterns that we extracted. We can then assess how well the predictions match the true dimension labels by just running a correlation. And then what we end up with are dimension representations over time. So here I'm just showing you the dimension weights and how well they correlate with the neurosignal over time. And again, the length just reflects how much information we have basically for this dimension in the neurosignal. And what you can see here is that the neurosignal is associated with dimension weights, and that this actually reflects the rich properties of visual perception. Instead of looking at this in this dynamic way, we can also look at each dimension activation over time. And here we can already see that there's some difference in the way that the time courses unfold. So for example, for food related, we have a peak at around 300 milliseconds, whereas for colorful, there's an earlier one at 100 milliseconds, and sports related is weaker, but also peaks at around 300 milliseconds. So to characterize these prototypical time series shapes, what we can do is we can compare each combination of dimension time courses. So for example, here I have colorful and cylindrical. And then we can run something called dynamic time warping, where we look at how much do we have to warp one of the time courses to make them more similar to the other one. We can represent this as a cost matrix, and here the gray path is the path of least cost. So like, and from this we can basically extract the distance from how far it is from here to here, and this gives us one single value measurement of how similar these time courses are. Then if we do this for different time courses, so for colorful and food related, for example, we see that here we need to do significantly more warping to make them more similar. Calculating all the distances for all of the different dimensions, we can then cluster them together and see which ones are most similar. So here we end up with 4 big clusters. And if we sort the time courses, we can see that there's some key characteristics that probably make them cluster together. If we average the time courses across the clusters, we end up with these 4 time courses here. And we can see that one of the characteristics is that whether the early peak is present or absent, and how the relative size of the second peak. And at the moment, we are investigating whether these different shapes are associated with dimensions that reflect, for example, primarily perceptual or conceptual properties. So to conclude, we found that behaviorally relevant dimensional content can be read out from time-resolved neuroimaging data, that this dimensional approach gets us closer to understanding the neural underpinnings of real-life visual experience. And the large-scale MEG data lets us extract prototypical time series patterns. And with this, I'd like to thank my collaborators, Martin Hebert and Chris Baker, and members of the section on learning and plasticity at NIH for helping us collect the data. And if you want to hear more about things, you can head to our website where there's many projects using these images, and also check out the OHBM poster from Philip, where he talks about neural network predictions and things. Thank you.